Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. New Zealand politics kicks off this year under the shadow of a looming general election. From a continued cost of living crisis and economic recovery to treaty debates and tensions between coalition partners, this year will see a mixed bag from the Beehive. It comes off the back of a major push for economic growth in 2025, with RMA reform and fast-track approvals dominating headlines. But will all of that pay off? Today on The Front Page, we dive into where each party stands, what they've announced thus far, and what the election campaign could bring us with Newstalk ZB political reporter Ethan Griffiths. Ethan, as we enter the new year, what do you see as, I guess, the defining issues that we're going to be voting on come election 2026?
In one word, it's the economy, right? Everything relies on the economy. It's the biggest issue for voters. Voters vote on how they're feeling in their back pocket. Now, we haven't seen much growth in the last 2 years at all. We're expecting moderate growth in the next 12 months. The question really will be, how much growth do we see? Nationals' fortunes rely pretty much entirely on the economy. It's not a be-all and end-all. They will seriously be hoping that we see some growth this year. Also, expect health to be a bit of a focus as well. The Ipsos Issues Monitor, which sort of records the biggest issues for New Zealand voters, is pretty clear right now that health is the second biggest issue. It was an issue last campaign as well. National and Labour have spent a lot of time talking about it over the last 2 years, so expect that to be on the agenda as well. I'd also keep an eye on superannuation this year. There's been a bit of talk from Labour and New Zealand First on that. Both have pretty strong policies on the issue of superannuation. Expect a policy from National on that as well. And one more to keep an eye on, immigration and migration. We've had some pretty high arrivals over the term. Expect New Zealand First to be talking a bit about that. But a bigger issue than that is, of course, the New Zealanders moving offshore migration, particularly the Kiwis heading over the ditch. So expect Labour to focus a lot on that as well.
Well, you mentioned the health of our economy there. Of course, it's obviously a major point of contention heading into the election. Do you reckon National will be in trouble even if it's a moderate shift when it comes to the economy? How many eggs have they put in the economy basket?
Pretty much all of them. I think it's fair to say this will be the number one concern on the ninth floor right now. What level of growth are we going to see this year? And as I said, I think it's clear that we will see some, and we desperately need it. The question will be, how much do we see? They will be hoping it's a lot. Will it be enough to get them over the line? I'm not ready to make predictions on that, but the economy is undoubtedly going to be the biggest issue of the campaign.
And of course, we'll look forward to Budget 2026. Hopefully it will be a bit sexier than last year's.
Potentially, but then again, the government's broke. They've got no money. There's no surplus in the next 5 years in the foreseeable future. This is a government who is essentially relying on cutting parts of the state and dishing out money to other areas, which they've done with things like Pharmac, cancer drugs, health, and things like that. It's unlikely to be a budget where lots of lollies are thrown around, but you never know.
Do you reckon parties will start politicking straight off the summer holidays?
Yeah, I think so. Expect in the next 2 weeks some major set-piece speeches by both leaders. Chris Luxon is planning a State of the Nation speech, which you can expect to hear at some point in the next few weeks. I have no doubt that Chris Hipkins will follow with some sort of rally as well. Both parties will be heading into January with their away caucuses, their caucus retreats, where they all go away to various parts of the country and have their little meetings and their little hooies in those places, and then come together ready to fight an election campaign. Of course, you've got Vatana and Waitangi coming up as well, the start of the political year, and that will make things even more explosive.
What pressure points do you see arising from the current coalition government, as they're more than likely straight off the bat going to be going their separate ways and trying really hard to differentiate themselves from the others?
Yeah, well, this is kind of uncharted territory, right? This is the first three-party coalition government. I think it's fair to say, looking at the polls right now, the parties have actually done an all right job at differentiating themselves throughout the term. I think the rules of MMP have slightly been shifted. I think we've seen a lot more disagreement this term than we have seen in any previous MMP governments. And I think the polls reflect that, both ACT and New Zealand First sitting quite comfortably there in the polls. On Winston, we're seeing it already. I sat down with him shortly before Christmas and he was criticising Nationals' talk on the economy and the lack of action that we're seeing. He's also been critical of ACT's regulatory standards bill as well. For David Seymour, the obvious one there is race relations. I also sat down with him just before Christmas, and he says that's a drum that he's going to continue to bang. It's a very important issue for the ACT party, so expect that to be part of the election campaign as well. In terms of it heating up this year, it's an election year. It undoubtedly will. But I think it's also worth noting here that all three parties have done a fairly decent job of differentiating themselves throughout the term. So expect to see a little bit more of that this year. It's naturally an election year.
Are you surprised that David Seymour will continue to bang on that drum?
Not hugely. It's a very important issue for him and clearly a very important issue for his voter base. I think of all the policies that he's come up with in the last, how long he's been in politics, 10 years now. Even euthanasia, I don't think, got as much attention for him. It was successful for him. It didn't pass. He got lots of headlines out of it. His supporters love it. I would imagine it's going to be an issue that he continues to explore come election year.
How would you describe 2025 for the ACT Party in a word or two?
Tough. It was tough for everybody, but towards the end, it just started to feel like we were turning a corner. And I hope as people come back into 2026, that momentum will continue for the whole country. And of course, I'd be lying if I didn't say I hope it continues for ACT.
Oh, of course. Okay, well said.
In terms of minor parties, Ethan, do you think any are well placed to really bring it back home in 2026 and have a kind of breakout moment, I suppose?
I can't see any breakout moments immediately right now. What I can see is a breakaway moment, and that's obviously Te Pāti Māori. They had a disastrous year last year, particularly the last few months. They had 6 MPs coming into Parliament this term. They've now got 4. 2 of them have been booted. Maria Meno Kapakingi from the north and Takata Ferris from the south, both quite popular MPs, particularly Maria Meno up north. Expect to see potentially those 2 run as independents or a new breakaway Māori movement begin. It will also be really interesting to see how the party sits with its own supporter base in terms of those people that support Maria Meno and Takata and are feeling disillusioned with the party. Looking also at the Greens, they've been bouncing around pretty much where you'd expect them to in the polls. But it's interesting, of all the party leaders, Chloe Swarbrick, co-leader of the Green Party, this is her first election as a leader of a party. So it'll be interesting to watch her and see how she performs this year as well.
It's actually easy to forget that it's her first election as leader because she has always been a prominent presence within the Green Party. Do you reckon that that's going to change anything for her, or is she just going to truck on?
She's a popular politician and she connects with a lot of different people. It'll be really interesting to see her travelling the length of the country and campaigning. Of course, she's also got her own seat, Auckland Central, which she'll be campaigning in as well. So it'll be very interesting to see how she balances that. And more broadly for the Greens, which electorates they keep as well. Of course, you've got Tamitha Paul here in Wellington Central. Those boundaries have changed. They might not be as favourable to the Greens. And then you've got Julianne Genter in Wellington Bays, the renamed Wellington Bays electorate. And it looks like from boundary changes that would benefit her as well. So the Greens could be in for quite a good year.
I know that the Opportunities Party has a new leader. Do you reckon they're going to make any waves?
They have a new leader, right? They've got some new blood. They're probably quite energised. I know that they've still sort of been around in polls around that sort of 1 to 2% area. I think outside of 2017, where Gareth Morgan were leading them, this election is probably their best shot at getting into Parliament. That's not saying they will. That is a wild call to say that. What I do think and see in the political realm right now is the purple vote is down. The purple vote is very, very small. People are looking for alternatives. Some people may be looking at the Opportunities Party and thinking this could be a good alternative. It's really going to depend what policies they come out with, how much coverage they get, and whether voters see them as a viable alternative to the parties already in Parliament.
And what do you reckon? I mean, we spoke about this a little bit on the podcast last year, this idea potentially of a break-off, another Maori-led party. Of course, you mentioned those two that have been expelled. What are the likelihoods, or is there any whisperings around Parliament that could actually happen, or will they just likely run as independents?
It's really hard to say. It's going to depend on them talking to their people and the support that they're gauging for themselves. I think it is interesting that in the High Court action we saw last year, where Mariamino Kapakingi challenged the Māori Party around her expulsion, that was just her. It wasn't both of them taking that court action together. So I'm not sure how much we read into that in terms of how they're engaging with each other, if they could form their own movement or run as independents. It's also very possible one of them might drop out and choose not to run and the other one does. I guess it's really a waiting game. And
remind us of a few election promises that we've already heard from thus far.
Yeah, it's actually been very light so far. To Labor, we've obviously had their capital gains tax policy, a 28% flat capital gains tax on investment properties, not the family home, not shares, and not the farm. Then they've got their future fund, which essentially is taking the dividends from state-owned enterprises, assets, chucking them into a little investment kitty and waiting 30 years to start pulling money out of that. And obviously they want to get rid of the Regulatory Standards Act in their first 100 days as well. That's pretty much it for Labor. For National, they want to bring KiwiSaver contributions from 3% to 6% by 2032. I imagine there would be some broad cross-party support for a policy like that. Obviously, they are the major party of government, so expect to hear much more from them as well.
Is it surprising this early on not to have, announced anything more?
Potentially from Labor's perspective, yes. They've had 2 years in opposition now. They've had the same leadership, so they've had to sort of get used to opposition, but they haven't had to get used to a whole new leadership team. You would think they would be bubbling away on the background on some policy. I'm sure they have, and it will come to the fore this year, but you'd probably expect more from Labor at this point in the term. In terms of the government, I think it's fair to say they've been focused on governing. They release policies all the time, policies that the government progresses with. It'll be very interesting to see of the three parties of government what they bring to an election campaign.
Well, perhaps Labor hasn't needed to. How have the polls been looking at the last half of last year?
This is the really interesting thing, right? The polls are at knife-edge territory. There were 47 polls conducted last year. I went back and had a look. Labor was leading in 22 of them. National was leading in 25 of them. So it is really split down the middle there. Now, those are various polls, different methodology, different companies, so take it all with a grain of salt. Also have to make the point that the government was leading in most of them while Labor was the largest party. If things could stay the same, we could realistically see some of the weakest purple vote in MMP, right? That's the red and the blue vote. Coming together, they are at record lows right now, and the minor parties are in very, very strong positions. It'll be interesting to see if there's any consolidation as the year goes on, but right now the polls are in very much knife-edge territory.
I've still got a lot of energy for this job. I only took over, about 8 months before the election. I had 8 months as Prime Minister, and I said there, as soon as I took over from Jacinda, I want Labor to get back to focusing on what the Labor Party is all about: jobs, health, homes, making sure we're raising living standards for all New Zealanders, focusing on the things that unite New Zealanders rather than the things that divide us apart, making sure that where we're dealing with controversial and tricky areas, like the treaty, for example, that we're slowing down a bit and we're bringing people with us. We're not, people don't feel like a whole lot's happening that they don't know about and they're mistrustful of that. I started that work when I became Prime Minister, and then, I still think that's work that the Labor Party needs to do. I think we need to make sure that we're there for the people who we represent.
And in terms of all of the party leaders, I know that there were a few questions swirling around last year. Do you reckon Hipkins will continue through to the election? I know he's told us he will.
I think it's likely. Labour are in a good position right now. The only way you could see him falling out of that job is if things get really dire for the Labour Party. And there's a fun fact here, actually. This is the first time ever, if both leaders stay in their job, the first time ever under MMP that two leaders have fought an election twice in a row. The last time that happened was before MMP in 1993 with Jim Bolger and Mike Moore. And this is where it gets interesting. In 1990, Bolger smashed Mike Moore to win his first term in office. 3 years later, Moore came within one seat of winning against Jim Bolger. So history doesn't repeat, but it may give us an indication of how tight this election could be.
And when those numbers become clearer, I mean, I know that Labour and Te Pāti Māori and the Greens have all kind of kept separate from themselves, and I suspect the coalition government parties will do the same coming into the year. When do you expect them to kind of merge together, I suppose?
I think throughout the year, all we're going to see is them sort of come apart a little bit more. It's fairly clear who the preferred partners are, right? Greens work with Labour. The Māori Party want to work with the left. ACT is very much, ACT would work with National. It's as simple really as that. But there is differentiation there. The parties have different policies. I imagine as we head towards Election Day, those differentiations are going to be much more clear. It's only after the election that they'll start to come together and negotiate either side, depending on where they sit, and then we'll get a result after that.
And you mentioned Ratana and Waitangi, of course, before the unofficial kicking off of the political year. Do we know anything about those events? Has anyone said that they're not going?
No, at this stage, well, we have Ratana next week up in the very hot Rangatike at this time of year. That is generally seen as the start of the political year. Pretty much all party leaders go to that event. I think David Seymour's missed it a few times. And then, of course, in early February, we have Waitangi up north, and that is always a set-piece event. It's interesting, the Prime Minister, Chris Luxon, didn't attend last year. He actually spent the day with Ngāi Tahu down in Akaroa, just outside of Christchurch. So it will be interesting to see if, given it's an election year, he will attend Waitangi celebrations. Safe to assume David Seymour will be there, Chris Hipkins will be there, the Greens will be there. Winston usually goes, that's his rohi up in the north, so no doubt he'll be there. The question really is the Prime Minister. He hasn't made a decision on that yet.
And Ethan, finally, give me some predictions for this year. I don't mind how wild they are, and I don't mind if you want to put some cash down if you're really confident about some as well.
Predictions are a fool's game, particularly in politics, but I'll give you three. It will be a November election. I'm pretty confident in that. Both National and Labour won't get more than 40% of the party vote, and either David Seymour or Chris Hipkins will get married, but both won't. Only one will. They're both engaged, obviously. So
only one will. Well, I've already seen a Women's Day NZ cover from one of them. Do you reckon there's going to be another as well featuring Seymour?
We'll have to wait and see. I don't know if he's ever been in Women's Day actually, but I feel like he'd quite enjoy it.
Yeah, I think so as well. Well, I reckon I'll put a couple of predictions down as well. I think you're straight on the money with no party reaching 40%. So I agree with you on that. But also I think a major announcement in regards to asset sales before the next election as well. I think that's going to be a hot topic.
I agree. It's certainly going to be one to watch.
Thanks so much for joining us, Ethan.
Thanks, Chelsea.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.